Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining this presentation. Let me walk you through a project we ran last year at JTI, Japan Tobacco International, about leveraging machine learning in order to increase the efficiency of forecasting the cash flows and increase the accuracy. As an introduction, I would like just to introduce my company to set up the picture and for you to understand what are our complexities and the kind of flows that we are using in our cash flow forecast. So I'm part of Japan Tobacco International, which is part of the JT group, and our parent company is in Japan. It was established in 1985 and still owned 1/3 by the Japanese government. We produce some tobacco products. We have also another branch for pharmaceutical, another branch for processed food, and we have around 60,000 employees worldwide, including JTI, where I work. And the international business, so where I work and where this project was implemented, it's around 44,000 employees as of 2019. We have almost 30 factories, 400 offices. We sell product in more than 100 countries in the world and have employees in over 70 countries in the world. And our revenue is around $12 billion. And as you imagine, this means that we have a lot of cash flows in many different currencies. And this is why it's very important to have for us a good forecast, cash flow forecast with as high accuracy as possible. So let me walk you through the agenda. First, we'll have a kind of background of this project. Then I'll show you a little bit of statistical forecasting, the basics and different kind of models to help you understand what we built and how we build it. Then we'll go more specifically on how we build up the model, what was the project like, how long did it take, what are the different parameters we try to implement and input in our model. And then we'll go to the results and the monitoring and also a little bit of conclusion and the next steps, because this can also be an ongoing project. So as an introduction, what's a cash flow forecast? First definition in this project. It's an estimated cash generation in the group, and it helps to identify, for example, the funding needs of the different subsidiaries, to plan the repatriation to the mother company, etc. So it's all the different cash flows that a company or subsidiary will experience over the next few months. We have monthly granularity. And so in the cash flow forecast, we ask the entities to forecast their finished goods sales, the amounts of leaf they purchase, the dividends that will pay, the taxes, the salaries, etc. And it helps, especially for us. I'm part of the FX risk management team, and we use this forecast to identify all the transactional FX exposure of the group over the next few months, and we have to manage this risk. What is a transactional FX exposure and how it is in JTI? So right now, because of the size of our business, we have several billions of dollar equivalent of transactional FX exposure to cover the next 12 months cash flows for the entire group. And this is what we want to achieve with this project, is to have an automated forecast that is provided every month for as much of the cash flows of the group as possible and to achieve accuracy as high as possible. So I'm part of the FX risk management team, and we take material financial transactions that are executed based on this forecast. And this is why we are targeting a very high accuracy, because if we don't execute effective transaction based on this forecast, it can have a significant cost for us. So if the forecast is reasonably accurate, let's say up to 20% of inaccuracy on any specific month, because we have a monthly granularity, then our FX hedging can be very effective and the FX risk can be very well reduced. And then the entities' cash flows can be secured effectively, and they can plan better the dividends that they will for the profit repatriation, and they can plan much better the future. So what happens first if a forecast is inaccurate, and why it's very important to have high accuracy? So I'll give you two examples. First one, imagine a company with a US dollar as its functional currency, and it forecasts 20 million euros of inflows. In JTI, we may take the decision, say, okay, this forecast should be accurate. Let's hedge it at 75%. So we execute a derivative to sell 15 million euros in the future to buy US dollar. And let's consider that for whatever reason, this forecast was not accurate, and the actuals come in at only 9 million euros. Now, the entity may not have enough euros to settle the derivative because they got only 9 million of inflow, but they need to pay the bank 15 million euros to get their dollars. And then to settle the derivative, they would need to borrow to cover the position, which incurs more cost. And it can be even worse. Let's say if the 20 million euros inflows is forecasted, but actually, again, for whatever reason, maybe a business decision change, maybe there's a big impact like the coronavirus. Instead of seeing 20 million inflows in the actual, you see a 12 million euro outflows. And if we had hedged 75%, as in the previous case, then we would actually make this risk much worse. Instead of having 12 million euros as the actuals, now we have a total outflow of 27 million euros that you need to fix, and this can incur significant FX results, FX loss. And so for JTI, it's very important, and not only JTI, for any multinational, it's very important to have a quite high accuracy forecast, and for as long as possible. It can be for 3 months, for 6 months, for 12 months, for 24, 36 months. In JTI, we set the timing for this forecast, this AI forecast, at 12 months. And why did we think about implementing or leveraging AI? So we have this forecast process in place for many years, I think since at least 2012. And we really hear every month the frustration of the forecasters because they put a lot of effort in the forecasting process, and the accuracy is not always as high as we would like. So we tried many different ways to improve this accuracy. We proposed accuracy report every month. We proposed training to train the forecasters on how they should approach this task. We proposed many different tools to assess the quality of the forecast, but it was not enough for us to have a good forecast. And early last year, we had a data science team that was created at JTI. And as soon as I heard about it, I leveraged it to discuss with them how to make a proper try at leveraging AI for forecast. And at the same time, I sent a survey to all the forecasters to know what was the workload for this 12 months cash flow forecast. And we could estimate that it takes more than 400 hours per month group-wide. So it's, as you can see, a substantial task. And the goal was that, okay, if we can reach the same level of accuracy as the forecaster currently do, but in an automated manner, so only with a model, with the machine learning, and then we could free up to 80% of the forecaster's time, then they can spend this time where they can have a greater impact. And this would already be a very good investment. And you'll see that the result was actually beyond our expectations, and we believe we can still do a bit more. So first, before going to our model, let me give you a very quick introduction to basic statistical forecast, because it will be very useful if you want to replicate the same approach in your company. So first of all, we are talking here about statistical forecasting. And what's a statistical forecasting? It's about predicting the future as accurately as possible, given all of the information available, including especially historical data, and if possible, because not always the case, knowledge of any future events that might impact this forecast. it is really about identifying the patterns in the past that can be projected to the future using statistical tools. And a few other definitions. So time series, it's a list of numbers along with some information about what time those numbers were recorded. We also have what's called a trend. It will be important in our model. It's the long-term increase or decrease in the data, in the amounts that we can see. And the seasonality, which sometimes is confused with the trend, but it's quite different. It's a pattern that is repeated over the time series. And the first technique that we are going to use, that's very simple, how to forecast the future. You can use what's called moving average. It's a statistical forecasting technique, and the rationale is that on average, the coming months should behave like the past one. So you can say, okay, for the next month forecast, I will just forecast the average of the past 3 months, or the past 6 months, or the past 12 months. So you can choose how many months you take into your calculation. You can also have something that's very important that I will come back later. It's called a naive forecast. So if you take just 1 month as your moving average, you can say, okay, next month's value, next month's forecast is equal to the previous month's actuals. And depending on the number of months that you take into your model, you can have different results. So for example, the green one here is the naive forecast with only 1 month as the in your moving average. As you can see, this month's forecast is the previous month's actual. This month's forecast is the previous month's actual, and so on. And here you really, it's very basic, and in some cases it works, and of course in many cases it doesn't. Like in this one, for example, you would have a lot of inaccuracy if you are doing this. If you take n equals 12, meaning that your next forecast, your next month, you forecast the average value of your 12 previous points, you get this blue line. And again, here, it's not very, it would not be very accurate in that case. And that's why we have other types of statistical models that we will use. Another one, which is a little bit more perfectionated, it's called exponential smoothing. What is this? It's still kind of moving average, but it says that the most recent observations should have the higher weight. So in that case, in the moving average, sorry, I'll come back, the weight you assign to each month is exactly the same. So if you take 12 months, then how do you calculate the next month? You sum your 12 previous months actuals and you divide by 12, and this is your next one. So you assign an equal weight to all your past observations. With the exponential smoothing, the most recent observation should have a higher weight, and it doesn't look only at the past actual months, but also look at the trend and the seasonality. So how do you compute this? You average or weighted average your past values with decreasing weight or exponentially decreasing weight. So the previous month has a very big weight, the month before has a little bit less weight, and 3 months before it has a very low weight, and so on. You do the same with the past slopes, and you do the same with the, and then you average your values or the estimated level on the same months in the previous years with decreasing weight. So for example, if you plan the next March, and you have a 12-month seasonality, so annual seasonality, to plan the next March value, you will look also at March of the previous year, and March of the year before, and March of the year before with decreasing weight. So just to give you an example, let's say we are planning to forecast this month here. First, you look at your previous observation. So these are the previous actuals, and you assign a different weight to all of them. So this one has the highest weight, then this one, and this one, and this one, etc. With decreasing weight, the further you go. And you calculate the average, or the weighted average, and you get this point. But this is not enough because we want to account for the trend also. So for the trend, you look at the previous trends of the previous few months. So you see, okay, previous trend is we go a lot higher than before. Then the trend before was we go a little bit down. Then the trend before go a lot down. Then the trend before go a little bit up. And here again, you make the weighted average of all these trends and say, okay, instead of forecasting this point in green, now you forecast a little bit higher because you expect the trend to go higher. And then you take into account the seasonality. Seasonality is you look in the previous month exactly the different forecasts that you had and the difference between these months and the mean for the year. And then now instead of forecasting here, you forecast right on spot. So in that case, exponential smoothing is a little bit more evolved than the moving average, and it's already quite a powerful technique. And one note here is that if you want to play around this forecast, ETS is available in Excel. It's called the forecast.ets method, I think, function. And you can play also with the different weights you assign to the trend, the seasonality, and the past levels. So have a try with this. It's quite interesting to see how you can already basically forecast automatically just based on the actual. And we go to a little bit more sophisticated technique, which is called Arima or Sarima if we want to take into account the seasonality. And this is probably one of the most used statistical technique to forecast time series. So the rationale is that we can use a smarter way to set the weights of past observation. So what does it mean? Arima, I think it means auto-regressive, so meaning you take the past data to compute the future. Integrated moving average, so it's still a moving average technique. And how do we set the weights now in this moving average? We base it on the correlation between the series and its lagged version. A lagged version is the previous months. And the higher the correlation, the higher the weight of those observations. I will, just like the exponential smoothing, I will explain in the next slide a bit more clearly. And how do we do the computation? We calculate the correlation with the different lags. So correlation with the previous month, with months -2, month -3, etc. Then we estimate the different weights of the previous observations based on those correlations. And at the end, we add an estimation of how wrong you were in predicting the previous values. So we also take into account the kind of previous forecast versus actuals to refine even more the algorithm. So here we calculate the autocorrelations. So for example, this is for the next, in this time series, we look at the next up to 15 months or the previous 15 months, and we look at the correlation between the previous observation and the current one. So here the line in blue shows the lag. This is lag of 1, this is lag of more, and we look at the different lags and we can calculate the different autocorrelation. So for example, here at this lag here, we have quite a good correlation. So we'll have, it's probably this one, 12, it's the lag of 12. And we see the very high correlation of around 0.6. So it means that it's quite correlated with how the forecast was 12 months ago. And this one is 6. And as you can see here, it's very correlated, but negatively. We have, when we have ups here, we have downs in the blue line. When we have down in the black line, we have ups in the blue line. So it's negatively correlated, quite heavily, also more than 0.6. And then this is how you set up the different weight. The weight for each of the previous observation corresponds to the correlation at the same lag. So As we saw, the 1 month lag had not a very high correlation. Sorry, had a quite high correlation. It will have a high weight. The one that is 6 months before will have a negative weight, quite high. And the one 12 months before will have again a very high weight. And same for all the observations. And then you calculate also the errors moving average. So in the exact same way, calculate always the errors between the different forecasts, between the different lags, sorry. And here we have a big error, here we have a small one, a big, etc. And in exactly the same way, you assign weights based on the correlations for these different lags. And finally, another method that we are going to use in our model here is the regression. The rationale of regression is a little bit different here than the time series, because regression doesn't specifically have a time series component or time component. But the rationale is to use one or more related variables to do the forecast. For example, you can plan your forecast salaries based on your planned headcount. And the computation is very easy. It's you estimate the weight of each variable in the final forecast. So in our case, as you can see, the more headcount we have, the more salaries go up. And this is based on many observations. And here the correlation is quite good. And then you can estimate the salaries expense for specific months if you know how many headcounts you will have for that month, based on the different way. So these are the different techniques that we are going to use. And here, let me dive a little bit deeper in our model and how we manage the project. So we really wanted to adopt Agile methodology and to be able to fail fast in a way, because we can think of so many different inputs to put into the model, but out of many inputs, maybe only a few will bring accuracy. So we had 4 sprints of 3 weeks, I believe. And the first sprint was about data quality, scope, and the base model. So if you plan to do a similar exercise at your company, please spend a lot of time on the data quality. Clean the data as much as possible, because all your calculation will be based on your data. So if you have mislabeled data, if you don't capture correctly all your cash flows, if you have the wrong booking somewhere, it will affect your accuracy. So it was very important to clean quite well the data. In our case, we have SAP implementation in many of our entities, so it was very helpful because we had the same format of data, first of all, almost everywhere. And we still spent a lot of time cleaning the data, to label correctly, to take a lot of history, to make sure that the data would be usable, and that doesn't need so much manual maintenance also. So what we looked at from the history, we could cover around 84% of the global scope. This is the sample that we use, because the remaining time series were not very recurrent. So some months we had a lot of data, some months we didn't have, etc. So we decided to have the scope on 509 time series, which is already quite a good number. We also had to define the metrics that will be used to compute the forecast accuracy and compare if the model was better or if the manual forecast was better. So first we calculated for each distance. So as I said before, we limited ourselves to 12 months for this exercise. We calculate the error percentage at each distance. And this way, we sum the absolute error. It's very important here again, take the absolute values of the error, because you don't want to have different errors that offset each other. Let me give you an example. Let's say you have a very basic entity and you have two planned cash flows, one of 10 million euros in June 2020 and one in of minus 10 million euros in December 2020. And sorry, let me rephrase. Let's say you have 100 million receivable in June and another 100 million receivable in December. And let's say the actuals come, and instead of 100 million, it was just 90 million in June, and then it's 110 million to actuals in December. What you want to show and highlight is that you had twice a 10 million error. So your error in that case is 20 million over the total amount for the year, which was 200. So you have 10% error. If you don't take the absolute value, you will show 10 minus 10. On my yearly forecast, I forecasted 200. I got 200 as actuals, so it's perfect forecast. At least in JTI, we consider that we had 2 times 10 million error, and this is very important to take the absolute error to calculate it. And we divide the absolute error by the absolute transaction value to get the error percentage. And the error, of course, is just the difference, the absolute value of the actuals minus the forecast. And then we checked 2 metrics, the percentage of improved time series. So it's the percentage of the time series that were improved over manual forecast. Or in other words, how many of my time series were more accurate forecasted by the model than what was forecasted manually. And also another metric was error improvement. So by how much was the forecast improved by the model over the manual forecast? So this was kind of setting up the project and see how it would be assessed and what are the success criteria. And we just tried a very basic model. Then in sprint 2, we wanted to add not only the historical data that was already input in the baseline model. So baseline model was just taking into account the past actuals to forecast the future cash flows. So in sprint 2, we wanted to check all the internal factors that we could add to the model. So we look at internal categories with correlation at different flags. And let me give an example. So we are selling cigarettes. And we wanted to see if, for example, we see a big leaf purchase in a factory, does it translate in big finished goods sales 2 months later, for example? You know, we take leaf in, we take paper, cartons, filters, etc. And the factory creates the finished goods, so a pack of cigarettes as you know them, and then sells them either back intercompany to sell in different markets or directly in the interlocal market. So we wanted to see, okay, if I see a factory buying a lot of leaf in a specific month, does it mean that 1 or 2 months later it sells more cigarettes internally or externally? And we looked at many different categories like this, different correlations here and there. And what happens is that none of these, even though we found some high correlations sometimes, it didn't lead to any material improvement in the model. And then we also improved the model by adding seasonality to the model and also the outlier detection. I will come back to what it is, but this increased also our model accuracy by 2%. And now we're going to sprint 3, where we really focused on external factors and advanced modeling techniques. So we checked in different sources, mainly Bloomberg for all the macroeconomic data, such as unemployment rate, GDP growth, commercial balance, interest rates. And we also checked in Euromonitor for data specifically about tobacco. So how many, the percentage of smokers in each country, how much budget they spend every year on the tobacco, etc. And although we found high correlations here, for example, just to give you a very concrete example, we found that in Brazil, our our salaries cost would be very correlated with the unemployment rate. So the less employment, the lower the unemployment in Brazil, the higher the salaries, which kind of makes sense. And it was very high correlation, more than 0.8 or something. And still, when we try to implement it in the model would not be more accurate. And what happens is that most of the data that we found was of quarterly granularity, while our forecast is on monthly granularity. So still, we had the fail fast approach. Like, okay, we tried, it doesn't work. We keep it up. And in the end, we didn't add any external factors, but we still plan to rework the model at a later stage and look again if we find better indicators. And also, we had an improvement to the model by adding the naive model. So if you remember, it's just that the next forecast is equal to the previous month. So we added a kind of naive model in our total model in order to faster adapt to the trend changes, which added a few percentage points of accuracy. And the last one is we finally got some interesting data to input in the model. It was all the accounts payable, accounts receivable that we have at the end of the month. We input this to the model to improve the accuracy, especially on the next 1 to 2 months. And we finalized the model. We also added a regression model based on the APIR data. And we created an ensemble. So it's just that means the output of your model is a combination of 2 or 3 different models that you have. One of them would be the naive, for example. And you take the combination of this forecast to be your full forecast. And at the end of the year, we could see that at distance 0, meaning forecasting just the next month, we had reached a very, very important error reduction, because the manual forecasts have like almost 27% of error, while the AI forecast had only 18%. So quite a big improvement. So coming back to all the points one by one. The data quality and outlier detection, so it was in the first sprint. It's very important to have clean data, first of all. But also, even when you have clean data, you may have some outliers. Meaning, let's say your forecast is always in the 10 million euro, for example, and 1 month you have 100 million euro. It can be you had a big capex, it can be a big expense, a big tax payment, I mean, some one-off payment. And it's very important that your model does not get polluted by this new one-off payment. So we have made an automatic outlier detection that can detect only the visible outliers. So basically, it's like I was saying, if you have always a quite constant forecast, or quite constant cash flows, but just 1 month you have a peak, then our model could approach this and say, okay, this one, it's an outlier, so I will exclude it from my history because I know it's not the new normal. And what we would like to input also in the next iteration of our model would be a manual outlier detection, because when you have an outlier, maybe it is the new normal. Maybe it's a big business change, business model change, and the new normal is that instead of having 10 million every month, you have 100 million every month. But this, the model would take 2 to 3 months to adapt itself to a new normal. But if you can tell him, hey, model, actually this 100 million that you see last month is the new normal, then the model can adapt from day one. And of course, it's always important to leverage the business knowledge. especially in that case that, okay, you have an outlier, maybe it's an outlier, but it will happen every quarter, for example. So it's important that you can also orient the model in the good direction. And with implementing the automated outlier detection, we could improve the error by 0.8%. Then we added the seasonal Arima. So what I was explaining before, in the basic models, it was Arima, and Arima cannot process the seasonality well. So we change a bit the model to add what's called Sarima. Seasonal Arima, it's a different model that I will not explain here. But it just like Arima, but adds the seasonal component. And also, we don't have a clear seasonality. I mean, our business is pretty stable over the year, very low seasonality. But still, we could have a little bit of forecast improvement, so like 1.3% improvement by implementing it. And then, as I said, we're adding the naive model in our total model. So some time series present sudden level shift. So in this one, for example, okay, we have an outlier here. Then we had a trend going downwards here. And then from here, it's quite stable, a little bit negative. So here we have different models. We have, if we use, I mean, the actual is in red, the naive is in yellow, orange. As you can see, the naive is just forecasting the previous month always. And we have Sarima, which is the green. And overall, in most of the cases, Sarima is much more accurate. And the naive usually is very not accurate. But they still have something different. The naive adapts much faster to the level change, since it considers only the last observation. But for the Sarima, because it takes a few months of history with different weights, it will take time to get to the new level. So we made an ensemble model. So we put a weighted average of both to forecast the higher weight for Sarima, because on average it's much more accurate. But we still added some material weight to naive to get their advantage. And for example, in this series, we can see that the ensemble is better than the Sarima, and probably better than the naive model also on average. And this led to an overall error improvement of 0.3%. And the last one is we were taking, at the end of the month, for all the entities in the group, we took the accounts payable and accounts receivable information. And so it's for 112 entities. We include the observation date and the due date of the invoice. And we took the values taken in the document currency and also in the local currency. And for some categories, we had a very high percent match. For example, for the finished goods, 98% of the finished goods amount were shown in the APAR. For other, same for the non-tobacco materials, so the filters, the paper, etc. But for some categories, for example, for the third-party payment, which includes our salaries, the percentage is very low. And one answer is that, for example, our salaries, they are not based on invoices. So every X day of the month, all the employees get paid, but there's no invoice anywhere booked in the system. It's just a payment like this. So that's why we have different percentage mapped for the different categories. And of course, we could see also in which months this would happen. So a lot of the invoices were concerning the current month and the next month. So it would help a lot to forecast the next month because a lot of the invoices are already here. And how did we do? We get the APR data on the 20th of each month because we ask the forecast to be available at the end of the month. And we use the past month data to find the relationship between the invoiced amount and the total volume in this category for the next following months. And I don't know if you can see the change in this graph. This is without the APR data, and this is with the APR data. So our forecast gets much better for the next 2 months based on this data. And of course, it doesn't change anything for the future because we have almost no invoice that go further than these 60 days. And this led error improvements of 1.1% for the 2 closest months. And we also added one last change is because of the instability of the model in some cases, we added automatic model selector. So basically, this is the final model flow. So we take into input only 2 sources, the actuals and our APIR. And then the model will select based on if the APR model is available, then we take to the regression model as we discussed before. And here, after it computes the regression model, it looks, okay, based on the performance of the regression model for the previous months, which one was more accurate? And if on average the regression model is better, then we use the regression model. And if not, we use a sprint 3 model. So sprint 3 model is outlier detection plus Arima. So basically, we have in the end a different, like 3 or 4 or 5 different models that are run concurrently, and we kind of choose the best based on the previous 2 to 3 observation to see which one is the best to forecast the next month. Now the results and the monitoring. So final results at distance 0, so forecasting the next month, we got down from 27% error to 18.37. So it's an error reduction of more than 30%. And on average, 65% of the time series are improved. So almost two forecasts out of 3 are more accurate by the model. And when it is more accurate, it's more accurate by quite a big margin. And because we forecast for the next 12 months, at distance 11, we checked also, and here again, the AI model was much lower, or was more accurate than the manual forecast, with error reduction by 15%, and 57% of the time series were improved. And of course, we checked also all the intra months, and consistently, the model was more accurate than the manual forecast. And so we estimate that out of the 400 hours that this process takes every month, we could save more than 320 hours if the forecasters would take our model as a basis and just adjust manually. Because if you remember correctly, at the beginning I said, okay, we would cover around 84% of the cash flows by our model. Some cash flows cannot be predicted accurately, let's say, for several reasons. One is the unexpected one-off payments. So for example, in one country, you have a tax audit and they say, okay, next month you need to pay 100 million. Whether it's the manual or the model, it's very difficult to forecast in advance. And in that case, also the manual forecast would have more information because we have more people that are involved maybe in the tax audit or stuff like this. So they can have more information than the model, and so they can forecast it more accurately. The other cash flows that are not forecasted automatically are the dividends, because most companies dividend 1 or twice per year, and the timing is not always the same, and the amount is not always the same, and it's kind of a business decision. I mean, it's the manager of the entities, they can decide how much they are going to pay to a certain extent. So in that case also, we thought anyway, manual forecast will always be better to forecast the dividends. So let's not even forecast them by the model. So this is also something they we ask the entities to forecast manually. And there's a few other payments, but few other categories, but mostly the ones that have low recurrence, that happens just once or twice per year. It would be very difficult for the model to forecast these ones accurately. And that's why we don't say that the process will be fully replaced by the machine learning, but it's a very big, a very helpful tool, very helpful basis for the entities to use as part of their forecasting process. And then since the go live, we monitor. First of all, how does this work? So the AI or the model collects the data automatically from different sources and generates the forecast and sends it to the forecaster. Then the forecaster reviews the forecast, amend if necessary, for example, with the dividend amounts, with some one-off payments, and then the forecaster submits it to me in Treasury, and I use it for different purpose. And at the end, the manual and the AI forecast are both stored for the monthly monitoring. And once the next month's actual or the next month's actual are available, we also automatically create the accuracy report that compares the model forecast and the manual forecast, all the ones that were stored in the database, and it sends automatically a report to the forecasters and to me also to check that which forecast was more accurate for which category, and gives a lot of insights to the forecaster to see, okay, do I need to use the model forecast? Can I use the model forecast reliably? And also very important is, where do I perform better than the model? Because if I perform better than the model, it's because I have better information than the model. And so next step is, how can I pass this information to the model so that it can forecast as good as me, and I don't need to do so much manual steps in the process. So hopefully this year we will make a second round to this model. So we'll reopen the model. Now we will leverage even more the knowledge in-house to say, okay, what kind of input I need to pass to the model for it to forecast even better. And we keep the monitoring of the forecast every month. And so for example, the first chart is the average error by distance from the manual error and from model error. So as you can see, the model is quite constant. Whatever the distance, its average error is around just a little bit over 20%. This is since the go live, so since last year. And manual error goes a little bit higher when we go outside of the planning cycle. And at distance 0, so the next month, as you can see, the model is also almost always more accurate than the forecast, than a manual forecast. With some months that the manual gets a little bit better, this is also, of course, okay. And just for the ones that ask, in February, for a business reason, we didn't have a forecast. That's why they both show 0. But on almost always, the model is more accurate than the manual forecast. So quick words of conclusion. Through this project, first of all, we could see the improvements in the forecasting process. Over the backtesting period, the enhanced accuracy was really substantial, more than 30%, and the trend was also continued since go live. So since go live in October 2019, we have kept the model forecast consistently below the manual forecast in terms of error. So it's more accurate. That was the first condition. And what we can see is that this model is based only on 2 inputs, the actual history and the APAR extract. So imagine with just these 2 inputs, which are quite easily available, we already perform better than the manual forecast. Just imagine how much better we can make this model if we could add the major inputs from all the current manual forecasts. So the production plans in the factories, the leaf purchase program, the capex commitments, the headcounts. I mean, as we could see, maybe the headcounts can help us forecast easily the salaries. So the more input we can put into the model, the more accurate it will be, and the less effort it will be for the entities. First, to forecast the future, but also to explain the accuracy. Because sometimes if the forecast that the forecasters provide, the manual forecast, if it's too inaccurate, they need to explain the inaccuracy in our company. So if we can work all together to have a forecast very accurate, maybe we don't even need to explain anymore because it's almost always as accurate as possible. So I hope this was a useful introduction for you. I'm sure you can replicate the same kind of processes in your company. Honestly, in JTI, I started in 2017. I started to look at this, and I started with the exponential smoothing function in Excel. So very basic, and even with this basic model in Excel, with all the inaccuracy it can entail, the forecast was already almost as good as the manual forecast. So don't be afraid to try. Just look first in Excel, familiarize yourself with the concepts. You will be surprised by how good it can be, and build on this. So I'm sure this is not rocket science in a way. There's a lot of good tutorials online also to help you understand what kind of model you can use, how to implement them, whether it's in Excel, whether it's in some programming language like Python or R. There's a lot of tutorials online. So if you are ready to explore, you will be really surprised by how much you can do with quite limited effort. So thank you very much for your attention. I hope it was useful for you. And if you have any question, you can reach me, and I try to help as much as possible. Thank you very much.